As we move forward, we have an excellent program today. And we are very fortunate to have Ross Ramsey with us. Ross, as many of you know, has been covering politics, covering the legislative scene in our state for many years, and in doing so, he has developed a statewide following. People wake up to tune in to the Texas Tribune to see what's happening, how it affects them, how it affects businesses, and how it affects our economy. And so the timing could not be more perfect. The dust has settled on a very busy and important legislative session. Now we are moving at 100 miles an hour into the political season. Lots going on. And so please join me in giving a big round rock welcome to Ross Ramsey.
I like the picture you guys put up. I look skinny. That's good. That's good to do. I'll just stand on this. Thank you very much for having me out here today. I would have been here even earlier than I got here, but they had the 11:30 traffic stop on I-35, and everybody had to tap their brakes. So we all stopped and waved to the cops and kept coming up. I want to kind of fly through the legislative session and the political world and leave a little bit of time here for questions. So with that in mind, I would have started, when we first set this up, I would have started by talking to you about the legislative session. But since then, we have grown yet another presidential candidate in Texas. So we're suddenly in the middle of national politics. So I thought I'd kind of start with politics, and we'll go through the legislative session and then come back through it. The story of the moment is Perry, Perry, Perry. If you look at our website or any other news website that covers politics in Texas, he's kind of the story of the moment. He's an interesting character in national politics for a couple of reasons that you might not catch if you're looking at this purely from a Texas perspective, because we're used to it. He's been in politics here for 25 years. He's been the governor for 10 years, 11 years. But if you go down the checklist of things that Republicans are looking for in a national candidate, and some of the things that are missing from their primary, you can see at least the rationale for getting him into the race. He's a fiscal conservative. He's a social conservative. He figured out the Tea Party before most Republican politicians figured out the Tea Party. He has somehow managed, and this is a Harry Potter trick, but he somehow managed to be in office for 25 years and be considered the insurgent candidate, the candidate of the people who are outside. And, it's a marvel. I mean, it really is sort of a hat trick. He's a Christian, which matters particularly in the South. It matters in parts of the Republican Party. He's from the South. He's good looking and he's well spoken, and it checks a lot of boxes. If you had asked me before, maybe 6 weeks ago, another box I would have checked, not just to be funny, is that he's not Sarah Palin. So he comes into this race and checks a lot of the same boxes and makes a lot of the same people happy, but comes in without any baggage. So he's kind of a fresh face. The other thing, and you can't underestimate this in politics, is he's a fresh face and kind of a new face in 49 states. So we've seen this candidate before and we're tired of him. And we've seen that candidate before and we're tired of her. Who's this new guy? So there's a little bit of that. Now, what comes with that is, and you will remember this from the Bush years, what comes with that is first everybody says, wow, look at this new candidate. And we're sort of in the position as Texans, both people in journalism and people not in journalism, of saying, well, this is what this guy's about. This is kind of, what the layout in Texas is. And everybody sort of gets the biographical part of the political race. And the next thing that follows is the opponent's side of the biographical part of the race. So the next thing that you'll hear, last week was the week where we hear about the Texas miracle, Texas jobs, everything's great, everything's wonderful. Every morning we come out and the clouds part and the angels sing and the squirrels all chirp. It's a Disney movie. So the next few weeks are going to be the people who are vying against Rick Perry are going to be saying, well, the Texas miracle is not a miracle at all. He hasn't been that good a governor. These are the things that are wrong with the state. So just, you saw this 12 years ago. Buckle up, here we go again. Texas is going to be on the burner for a while. I think, if I was prognosticating, I would say Perry's a pretty viable candidate. You can get candidates in a race at this point, and we may yet get a couple more. You can get candidates in a race at this point, and it's too late for them to raise money, or this part doesn't work, or that part doesn't work, or the other thing doesn't work. One of the advantages that Perry, or one of the attributes that Perry has always had, is he's never been in a political race that I know of where he was overestimated. They always start by saying, that guy can't do it, he's not smart, he's all hair, he's too good looking to have a brain, all of that kind of stuff. I think he's got some staying power, he's got a good team around him, he's got the ability to raise some money. The first part of this race for political professionals to watch is going to be what the first quarter reports at the end of September look like, who's raised money, who's stopped raising money after Perry got in the race, all of those kinds of things. And then, we're off to the races. So when you move Perry out, Texas has had this interesting problem. Since 1994, Texans have not elected a Democrat to statewide office. So we have this org chart, and if you're in a big company, you know how this works. If you're in the middle of an org chart, or kind of at the bottom of an org chart, and everybody at the top is young and healthy, you're going to be at the bottom or the middle of the org chart for a long time. So there's some pent-up demand among Republican office holders. So Rick Perry is going to move. Well, that could open the governor's job. Everybody, when they get up in the morning, politicians look in the mirror and they see, when they're putting on their makeup or they're shaving, they see historic figures in the mirror. And those historic figures are senators and governors and things like that. So when you take one guy out of the org chart, you start to get people looking around. You're taking two people out of the org chart this time. The first two people that were they weren't the first two in, but the two people that got in 1990 with staying power were Rick Perry and Kay Hutchison. They won office that year. They weren't supposed to win, really. Odds were against them. They both won, and they dominated. They've been at the top of the org chart for a while. So in January, Kay Hutchison said, I'm not going to run for re-election this time. We sort of watched this for 7 years or so, I think. She isn't, but she's finally not going to run for re-election. And so you started another round of this people looking in the mirror. So what you get now, long story short, is the top two guys in state government are looking at moving on, and half of the rest of state government is looking at moving into those jobs. So one more thing I'll say about politics here. We just finished redistricting, so this is also going to be the political year when everybody in Congress, everybody in the state Senate, everybody in the Texas House is on the ballot. So if you have any money, or politicians think you have any money that you're going to contribute to politics, go hide. Get a storm cellar or a basement or something and duck, because they're going to be after you. They're going to be knocking on doors. It's going to be a really busy political year with a lot of movement. We could replace 20 or maybe even 30% of the Texas House. We could replace 4 or 5 Texas senators, which is unusual. Usually in the Texas Senate, it's an incredibly stable body. Usually there's no movement at all. So there could be some big changes. One other thing I'll say about the succession games. If David Dewhurst moves out of the lieutenant governor's job, and you'll remember this from 2000, George Bush gets elected, Rick Perry moves out, the Senate elects from their own number somebody to be the lieutenant governor. So if David Dewhurst moves on, one of the senators moves up. And that's, like a speaker's race. It'll be a big noisy thing. We'll have Tea Party people over here. We'll have, sort of traditional Republicans over here. We'll have Democrats over here. It'll be noisy for you guys. It'll be great for the Texas Tribune. And then we have this other prospect of, if Perry were to go all the way in this thing and he were to win, then what would happen is the person that the Senate elects to be the lieutenant governor to replace Dewhurst would become the governor. And then the Senate would go back into their ranks and elect a lieutenant governor. So there's a bunch of senators sort of milling around. Some of the people who are thinking, well, maybe I won't run for re-election this year because, there's no up on that org chart, or looking at the org chart again and saying, well, my hair's not that gray, I might run again. Kind of an interesting deal. The thing they're going to run on, everybody left this legislative session. This was a really difficult legislative session, no matter what your politics were. And it was difficult for a couple of reasons. We started in the hole. We had a decline in sales tax returns. The state's business margins tax doesn't bring in what they wanted it to bring in, and in fact doesn't bring in enough to cover the spending that was linked to it. Remember this deal in 2006 when they said, we're going to lower local school property taxes, we're going to raise state taxes to make up the difference. The state taxes didn't make up the difference, kind of long story short. So they started about $10 billion behind every time. And then they had a sales tax decline. And then they had this problem that this all would have happened in 2009, but a leprechaun showed up called the Federal Stimulus Program and delivered a pot of gold with $17 billion in it. The legislature, grabbed it like you would. Why cut when you don't have to? And so they balanced the 2008-2009 budget with that. They balanced the 2010-2011 budget with that. And when they arrived this time, that was one-time money. So that was gone. They had the sales tax slump, and they had the structural deficit. So they start with a problem in the budget that's not exactly a deficit, but is sort of the gap between what you promised to do, the cost of what you promised to do, and the amount of money that you have available. And that gap was estimated, depending on what your politics were and who you talked to, at somewhere between $18 and $28 billion for 2 years. Only part of the budget is discretionary. So when you take $28 billion, just use that for the number, let's say $25 billion. If you take $25 billion out of the state budget, you don't take it out of the whole $180 billion state budget. You take it out of the $85 billion discretionary budget. So think about your discretionary budget losing about $1 of $3. And that's why this was a very difficult legislative session. It was a Republican legislature. Even the Democrats in the Republican legislature got here, many of them, on a no new taxes promise. So the first thing was, we're not going to increase revenue. The second thing was, we're going to have to tighten our belts. And the third thing was, you very quickly realize when you're cutting that much money out of the budget, that you're either going to cut education or health and human services or both. The problem with health and human services is a lot of it's required spending. It's, you sign up for this federal program, you're in it, you got to spend this much money, you have to serve you serve all comers, it costs this much money, and that's what you've got to do. The problem with public education is that it's one of the things that voters really, really, really care about, particularly in suburbs, particularly in Republican suburbs. So a lot of the reason people move to the suburbs was to get out of, if you're in the Dallas school district and you have kids, one of the reasons you move to Plano is to get out of the Dallas school district with your kids. So you're not happy when your legislator comes home and cuts the budget. So this is kind of what they faced. And then the third thing that they faced, on top of the budget and redistricting, which I mentioned a minute ago, redistricting is a weird thing in a legislature. It's like walking through a kennel with a pillowcase full of meatballs. All the dogs start barking, everybody's completely distracted the whole time, and it just makes the session difficult. So you have a budget, you have redistricting, and then we have this process we call sunset, where they take state agencies every 12 years and they have to prove their worth. So you walk in and you're the agency for, whatever, licensing and regulation. Every 12 years you have to prove your case again. The legislature looks at you, reviews you, either funds you or kills you. They rarely kill you, but they often do a pretty top soup to nuts, revision of an agency. They had 28 of those this year. So they had all of that, and then they had all of the stuff that you elected for. We want a low water crossing over here, or we want the state to, build red light cameras over here, whatever the local concerns are. So when they got out of the session, they were kind of cranky. They also had, I should mention that they also had something we call the Animal House package. Every legislative session, it's 20 weeks long, and there's always something that comes up that's both funny to cover, and also if you're trying to get something out of the legislature, it's a distraction. It's the kind of thing that takes 2 weeks out of the session when you can least afford it. So they were animal bills this time. It was puppy bills, endangered lizards in West Texas, a bill we called the pork chopper bill. This was the thing that allowed you to shoot feral hogs from helicopters. And noodling, which was a sport, quotation marks here. It's a sport invented apparently by drunk Cajuns, where you go out into the middle of a river after a significant amount of beer, and you stick your arm into a log on the bottom of the river, and you hope that the thing that bites your arm is a large catfish. You pull it out with your arm. I would encourage you to go look at YouTube. It's a scream. But it was, for no apparent reason, that was illegal in Texas. So